Welcome back to another Giant Slayer patch notes rundown. This week we'll be taking a look at all the balance changes in patch 10.3, and our expert analysts are here to unpack how the new changes are going to affect the game. But before we begin, please be sure to follow Giant Slayer TV on YouTube and via our social media links, checking out our upcoming TFT tournaments as well as our amazing cast, all of which can be found down in the description. Now let's take a look at the patch 10.3 champion tier list. First, we have a few changes to the core game mechanics for some general quality of life upgrades. New patch back at it again with the loot round normalization. Krugs are now guaranteed to drop 2 items up from the previous minimum of 1. This helps eliminate some of the low roll games that would give players no significant benefit during a loot round while their opponents complete items and hit an early game power spike. There have been a healthy dose of loot round improvements over the past few patches, and we're happy to see them continue. Next, we have quality of life improvements to the carousel round. Touching the edge of your ring on the carousel stage no longer ports you back to the middle. This is a pretty minor change since most players have adapted this mechanic by now, but it's a nice one nonetheless. There's also a new sound that will play when you pick up a champion from the carousel, removing the guesswork that led players to track down their number 2 and number 3 picks anyway because they couldn't tell who got there first. We have some changes to the way players obtain spatulas in their games, which is perhaps the biggest change in 10.3. Spatulas no longer appear in carousel stages. To offset this slightly, the drop rates of the content in gold boxes has been adjusted to include more gold, more spatulas, and fewer champions. This means that taking damage early to pick up a second or third round spat and using it to force a comp is no longer a good or reliable option. The implications here are pretty big for comps that rely on or heavily favor extending their allegiance tag to additional units, including high-tier comp like Light or Assassin from the current meta, as well as a host of other less popular comps. It's hard to know exactly how this is going to play out until we see just how rare the spatulas are, but these builds are going to change and become more reactive to loot rounds rather than proactive game plan. It's going to be interesting to watch this meta respond and unfold in the future. Moving along, we have a few items that have seen minor tweaks this patch. First up, we have Ionic Spark, which was reworked a few patches ago and has not seen a ton of play since then. It's getting a damage buff from 200% to 225% of spell mana cost, which may help a little bit, but is not likely going to increase the desirability too greatly. Next is Luden's Echo, which has been a niche pick for Kog'Maw, but has really excelled there. It's getting some tweaks to scaling with a slight damage buff from 125 to 150 at level 1 to make it more desirable, but toned down from 250 down to 225 at level 3 to reduce the power of double Luden 3-star Kog'Maw in the Predator build. Static Shiv is getting buffed from 80 to 85 damage per hit, which is going to be a welcome improvement to Ashe and Ranger comps. Not many other applications for this one at the moment, but perhaps the buff will open up a few additional characters. Finally, we get a much needed and long overdue nerf to Infinity Edge, which has been far away the best DPS item for auto attackers since, forever. The crit bonus damage is being reduced fairly substantially from 125 down to 100%, which is a major hit to its splash ability on a low crit percent champion such as Rangers, though the item is still likely going to be quite strong in the hands of Assassin. Next, we'll take a look at a few traits that are getting adjustments. Starting off these changes to traits, we have some tuning to the Assassin tag. The crit damage bonus is getting a buff from 65% to 70% at 3, and a nerf from 225 down to 210% at 6. This is going to be quite punishing to the 6 Assassin build, who are also going to be losing consistency due to the spatula chain. On the plus side, the 3 Assassin splash is going to get a little stronger in comps like Summoner Assassin and as a general transition tool. We'll see a minor improvement to the Lunar tag with an increase in ability power bonus per stack from 10 to 15. This is not likely to have big implications on the playability of Karma and Leona, but some comps play them in the mid game may hold onto them just a little bit longer. Next, we have a nerf to the shadow damage bonus at 6. It's going down from 175% to 165, which is a relatively small nerf and shouldn't push them too far down. 3 shadow will remain unchanged and continue to be a viable splash. And lastly, we have Light, which is receiving a few changes and looking a bit weaker overall. Light units healing on death amount is going down from 25% down to 20 at all levels, and the attack speed bonus is buffed from 15% to 20% at 3, but nerf from 35% down to 30% at 6, 55% down to 50% at 9. These changes will be fairly significant to light comps, which generally stick to 6 lights, and in conjunction with the spat change, this comp will be significantly weaker than it was in 10.2. Now, on to the champions. First up, we have Kog'Maw, whose spell damage is getting buffed at all levels from 125, 275, 425 to 150, 300, 500. This buff will balance out the Luden's Echo nerf to focus Kog'Maw's damage more on his main target than his splash hit. This will make him a far more manageable and therefore weaker overall level 3 Kog'Maw. Next up is Ornn, who's getting a buff to both spell debuff duration from 4 seconds to 10 seconds and spell damage amplification from 20% up to 25%. This is a pretty significant buff, which will cause him to see some more play as an early game warden. His ult also has a great deal of synergy with the electric tag, and it will be interesting to see if it has any impact there. Another change to the strength of lights comes in the form of a Vayne attack speed nerf. He's going down from 0.75 to 0.7, which is an important change since that value is multiplied every time a light unit dies, and a lower base will make for a much weaker Vayne at the end of fight. It seems appropriate for Vayne to act as a Lucian item placeholder since she is only a 1-cost unit, and perhaps this change will push 6 light in that direction. Our perpetually bottom of the tier list friend Braum is getting an alt buff, with spell damage prevention increasing from 70, 80%, 90% to 80%, 85, 90%. This may help him slightly out in the mid game and make him a little bit more desirable to Warden players, although he still doesn't bring much to the table mechanically. Continuing on the trend from last patch, Jax is getting yet another buff. This time it's his spell damage that will see a buff from 250 to 300 at level 2 and 450 to 550 at level 3. Jax is already in a respectable place and sees play in both light and berserker comps, so this will be a welcome change to both of those. Levant's spell damage is going up ever so slightly from 200 to 225 at level 1 and 450 to 475 at level 2. This likely won't have much of an impact, although early game Woodland and Assassin players will benefit a little bit from the change. Next, Rek'Sai is receiving an armor buff, moving up from 30 to 35. This is a reasonably strong defensive improvement, which will help the front line of Predator comps and perhaps bring her in as a steal splash in Assassins on occasion. Voted strongest champion without a home by our scriptwriter, it's Yasuo, and he's getting a buff. His mana cost is going down from 100 down to 85, which will help him ult both sooner and more often. He is already a strong character. Perhaps now Yasuo will be able to bring a few units together and find a comp to call home. Next, we have Nocturne, who has all but disappeared after he was ripped away from Blender comps a few patches ago. With the subsequent nerf to the Blademaster Alliance and Nocturne Splash double stacking, he has some room to move back up in the power for the sake of Assassins and Steel, and his attack damage is being raised from 55 up to 60 in an effort to make that happen. Dr. Mundo's health base is increasing from 750 up to 800. This is a pretty small amount, but since his ult also scales with his max health, it represents some additional damage and heal value there as well. Along on to Annie, or should we say Tibbers? Tibbers is going to see a few changes this patch. His health is getting adjusted from a flat 2000 to scale now with Annie's level. This makes level 1 Tibbers a bit less tanky with just 1600 health, although level 2 gets slightly stronger at 2200 health, and level 3 is now an absolute titan at 3000 health. Oh, and Tibbers is getting an attack speed buff going from 0.6 up to 0.65 as well. He already slaps hard, but now he's a bit faster. It's trivia time. Did you know that Janna's ult has a stun? It was the shortest stun duration in the game, but got just a little bit longer as the duration extends from 1 second up to 1.5 seconds, bringing it in line with other similar CCs. Janna was already very much seeing play as a defensive mystic, and this buff will certainly help her in some matchups. The last of the light adjustments for this patch is Lucian, whose ult is receiving a buff. The number of shots is going up from 10 to 12, and the damage ratio is going up from 0.25, 0.3, 0.5 to 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. Overall, this is going to make him hit a little bit harder while ulting, and perhaps Lucian will be able to take over and carry lights after all the nerfs they've received and suffered already. Moving along, Olaf is getting attack speed buff to his level 3 only, going from 300% up to 450. This is a wonderful change since the difficulty in getting a 4-cost unit up to level 3 is immense, and anyone who's ever successfully completed the 3-star Olaf in the past can tell you it's been surprisingly underwhelming until now. Next, we have the continuation of a trend as old as time. Yorick is receiving balance changes. His health is going up from 800 to 850, but his mana cost is going up as well from 75 to 85. He should still ult before dying, but it will take a little longer, and in long fights, he's going to get fewer ults overall. The health of ghouls is also going down slightly from 800 to 700 at level 2, which is where he really shines. Overall, this is both a nerf to light and summoner comps, though if the past is anything to go by, this will not be the last we see of Yorick. On to Master Yi, who is getting an attack speed buff going from 1 up to 1.1. This will help him deal a little bit more damage and get his ult off faster, which will in turn stack up even more attack speed off of his buff thanks to the additional multiplier. Overall, this change will be a nice one for late game shadows. Zed is getting a buff to his mana bar, and he'll be starting with 75 of 150 mana, up from 50 out of 150. Overall, this is going to help him ult more reliably and may bring him back in favor in a way we haven't seen in quite some time. Last and certainly not least, Lux is getting a nerf. Her level 1 ult damage has been reduced from 600 down to 550, which will slightly tone her ability to dunk on comps with resets as soon as she's picked up. Lux has been exceptionally strong lately, and the change seems fitting as an endgame balance move. Finally, there are several bug fixes, a welcome addition to any patch, though none of these are super impactful on gameplay, and there isn't a ton of analysis to be done. Multiple Titans resolves are no longer multiplicative. Inferno should no longer proc spell shields like Trapclaw. Kog'Maw's living artillery can no longer hit untargetable units. LeBlanc and Yasuo now properly deal spell damage to champions with Quicksilver, and Karma can now target untargetables with her shield and link such as Zephyr or Spellbound. And that is going to be it for today's video. Now it's time to test it all out. We would love to hear which comps you're planning to play with this patch, so let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the future for more Meta Mondays, patch note rundowns, and tier list Thursdays. Thank you everyone for listening to Giant Slayer TV.